you who attended our AGM, and there are some in the room, but not that many, you will see that a lot of this is what we presented at the AGM. And that there hasn't been a right lot that's changed since the AGM, and we'll go into some of the reasons why that might be. Okay, so we're going to talk a bit about the Building Safety Act, how we've got to where we are today, and what it means. Chandru did that very, very well this morning. I might have a slightly different take on it. What that's going to mean for construction, for people who construct, what that means for people who manufacture, and we'll go from there. And then we'll look a bit about competence at the end. And my competence at the end is leading up to Kate, who's going to come here and do the third presentation in this block. So let's consider, okay? In the UK, since the Grenfell fire, we've got 3 separate legal tranches which have been going through Parliament through it since the fire. And sorry, one thing I would say is, for those of you taking notes and taking pictures, you don't need to do that. We are going to make these slides available to you at the end of the session, so you can get this and you can have this and read this at your leisure for what it's worth. Right. So we got three key things going forward. The Building Safety Act is the big one that we're going to talk about this morning. After the fire, we had Dame Judith Hackett did her review of all the causes of it. She produced the report there, Building a Safer Future. That had 53 recommendations in it. And the Building Safety Act is the forerunner to what's going to happen and how government implements all those recommendations. There was the Fire Safety Act, which went through Parliament a bit quicker. And that's a reinforcement of the Regulatory Reform Order for multiple occupancy buildings. And that sort of clarifies that flat front doors and external walls are common parts of such a building, and therefore brings all those into scope of regulatory reform and the fire risk assessments and that you would need to do under RRO. And then there's also been a thing called the Fire Safety Regulations 2022. And what that does is that brings about some of the findings from the stage 1 of the Grenfell inquiry as to what happened on the night of the fire and how the fire and rescue services responded. And that's legally bringing those recommendations into force. But let's concentrate more on the top one. The Building Safety Act, and how we get to it from what Dame Judith said. However, there are those of us in this room within ASFP for whom this is nothing new. This is a report that was produced by ASFP all the way back in 2003. It was led by a former chair of the ASFP and a former colleague of mine, David Sugden. And David produced this report on ensuring best practice in passive fire protection. You can read the quote that's on the screen there. We recognised all the way back then that there was an incident coming and that we needed regulatory change to help drive a better and more rigorous standards in building. Okay, because the culture change, we need something to snowball and start that culture change. And that culture change is still, this is a quote from Dame Judith from Building a Safer Future. This is a piece that she put very, very early in Building a Safer Future. Look, we need this, recognising that we need a culture change. We need to deliver an effective system so that these complex buildings are safe for those who are living in them. Okay, so we need to, Building a Safer Future was making the same point that we'd made 15 years previously. So we have the Building Safety Act. For those of you that weren't aware of this, it achieved royal assent on the 28th of April, and the final text of it was actually published in the 16th of May. And if I come back to Chandru's driving analogies, what I've said about this in the past is, this is not the policeman with the radar gun pointing it and getting you to slow down and do the right thing, but this is the set of rules by which the policeman is going to be allowed to do that. It's going to be, in effect, the policeman for a lot of this will be the health and safety executive, as we've discussed, but this is the enabling legislation that's going to ultimately give the powers to the health and safety executive to achieve all these things. There are a couple of interesting little things, however, within the text that we've got, that Building Safety Act 2022. Building Safety Manager has been removed from it. Principal designer, principal contractor, as Richard was talking about, remain, but the Building Safety Manager has been taken out. Governments, there is a bit of a discussion. They say that all the provisions that the Building Safety Manager was expected to do, they're still in there, but we don't want to add a formal title. We don't want to add a formal role for that, because if we do add that formal role, it might lead to excessive costs for residents who are already facing other increasing costs. And of course, we're up against safety versus the increasing costs and the cost of living crisis that's going on at the moment. The other thing that's not in there, it was interesting that the Aviva mentioned it in their slide this morning about PEEPs, these personal evacuation plans, and they've been removed from a legal requirement. So there's a couple of three things happening where do they represent value for money is government's question. So there are things happening within this as we go through this where maybe some of the things that Dame Judith wanted aren't being delivered quite in the way that we expected them to be. Government gave us this slide, and he says, they gave it to us about 12, 15 months ago, and this was the framework by which we're moving through the process. And as we stand at the moment, the sort of down the diagonal line, we're in box 3, formal consultation on draft regulations. So the Building Safety Bill's got its royal assent and it's become law. And we've now got, as Chandra mentioned, there's a whole load of consultations out. There's about 30 odd that Niall and I are plodding through at the moment, covering building regulatory frameworks and building control, covering who pays for what, covering residents' voice and stuff. And there's more to come, according to Chandru this morning. So there's still more of these things to do. And as we go through that gets us through, ultimately we'll have some secondary legislation. Again, there'll be another comment period. Then when those secondary legislations are laid before Parliament, they become law, transition period, and then all of a sudden everything comes into force. But maybe it's worth considering that's where we're going, but have we got through those first two boxes? And if you look at what's happened, and again, Chandru had that slide which he went through with this. We got the Building a Safer Future report out in May 2018. We had a series of consultations in 2019, and we actually got the first drafts of the Building Safety Bill and the Fire Safety Bill fairly early in mid-2020. And the Fire Safety Bill went through Parliament really quite quickly and became law April 2021 within 12 months. There's another slide that comes up in a couple of minutes where they predicted that Building Safety Bill wouldn't be much further behind that, but actually it's taken they were predicting 9 to 12 months for it, and actually what it ended up taking 22 months to get the Building Safety Bill into the Building Safety Act. And one of the big reasons why this whole process took so long, and why the Fire Safety Bill was quite quick, was because the government sort of ignored, when the Fire Safety Bill went through, they ignored the question of who pays. They got quite a bit of stick over the who pays issue, and they sort of had to sit back and wait with the Building Safety Act to sort the issue of how things were going to be remediated and who was going to pick up the tab for remediation. And basically, the whole who pays thing was an unanswered question until the 10th of January this year. And there was a major policy speech in the House of Commons. Secretary of State at the time for housing was Michael Gove. Michael Gove stood up and said, right, that's it. You know, it's not fair for leaseholders to pick up the tab for any of this. If they've got buildings that were incorrectly constructed for whatever reason, they should be protected against those bills. Okay, so they want the construction industry must pay to fix these issues. Now, a series of developers have already signed up to remediating some of the cladding issues that they have. There's been some discussion between construction products manufacturers and government, which didn't end well. And so we've got that. But on the other hand, at the same time, government says we want to restore common sense, okay? Because we've got building safety risks, and we've got an issue with the fact that everybody's getting that much more risk averse now and can't get PI cover, and we can't, and people don't want to sign things off, and everybody's trying we've gone from a situation where people were ignoring risk to now people are very risk averse, and as long as we're aware that there's some risk there, but we don't want any of that to be ours, we want to send it down the chain somewhere else. And the whole question of design liability does come out, and some of Richard's stuff this morning was very interesting, thinking, well, actually, you may have a contractual situation that says we divest the risk, but will that stand in a court of law? And we've got the government wants us to work together and have a common sense approach, but at the same time that they want us to work together and have a common sense approach, we're aware of the fact that this extension of the Defective Premises Act to 30 years potentially creates a massive iceberg, because we've been talking about buildings over 18 metres, and there's funding for buildings over 18 metres to have their cladding fixed. But what about buildings under 18 metres? And what about all the other potential defects, the doors, any fire stopping? And how do we, all these other potential safety critical issues that have been designed and built into buildings going forwards? Going back in time. This is a major problem that's out there, and we've no idea what the size of that is. And what Michael Gove was asking construction products to give was almost a blank check. You fix this, you will sort this out, it's your products, you can pay for this. Well, what he thought they might want to give us, what he thought we might want was about what construction products association members were willing to give him. But there was a times 10 difference. He wanted 10 times more. And so there was that discussion has paused, it's stopped. There was a fairly terse exchange of letters between the Chief Executive of CPA and Michael Gove. We're just keeping an eye on that one to see where that one will go next. But this is the problem, and this is the reason you're seeing this now, and it looks very, very similar for those of you that were at the AGM, is because it is. Because basically, of course, where we got to, our AGM, for those of you that can remember, we had a guy from the Ministry of Housing due to come and give us a keynote speech, and it was all scheduled for it was the day that Boris resigned. It was the day that all the ministers ran for cover or resigned, and there was no way we were getting someone, so we ended up with needing a whole new keynote speech, which most of this was. But the problem is that the housing secretaries over the last 12 years have all had different amounts of clout within government. When we had that policy announcement on the 10th of January, Michael Gove stood up there and said, residents shall not pay. Sat on the back benches behind him was Robert Jenrick. And Robert Jenrick was thinking, well, that's what I wanted to say. You know, he stood up and said, it was all very well and good for you, Minister, to be able to stand there and say this. That's what I wanted to say 12 months ago, but I wasn't allowed to. You know, so it depends how. And of course, the reason I say this hasn't changed anything is because we've had Greg Clark in his second stint as Housing Minister since the resignations that we had in June when Boris said so long and thanks for all the fish. And we're still waiting now. You know, we've got a couple, 3 more days to find out who the question mark is on the end of that. And Greg Clark has done exactly what he was supposed to do as interim housing minister over that period. He's done nought. So we're waiting to see who that is and what that will be and where the economy versus safety argument goes, because that's how this whole thing will be played out within government. You know, purely economy versus safety. So here we go. This is where we see. This is our timeline of what we see going forwards. Royal Assent. We've had Royal Assent, which is the second red blob. Royal Assent plus 2 months has passed, so that's the extension period for Defective Premises Act. And then there's a load of stuff going out there. The interesting one there, we were talking this morning, the question I had as Chandru just bolted out the door. It says Gateways 2 and 3 at Royal Assent plus 18 months, which is October next year. So that's when we have had some intel from various tier 1s. They think it's coming sooner. And so, you know, this is what we're worried about. You know, we see how this goes through. But Royal Assent was anticipated 9 to 12 months after the bill was introduced. And it wasn't 9 to 12 months after the bill was introduced, it was nearer 24. So Chandru mentioned this morning we've got a new regulator. Our new regulator is under the auspices of HSE. That's already gone live. It went live before they had the legal powers because we knew we were going to do it. They were called the shadow regulator. And that's done. And they're going to be covered by an amendment of the Health and Safety at Work Act. So it's the Health and Safety at Work Act covers it. Chandru said that. We had the open warrant question. And so that's how this will work. There is, on the HSE's website, there is a section on building safety. There is a newsletter you can sign up to. They do a monthly newsletter which tells you what they're up to, what's coming next from them and how their roles are evolving. So I would encourage you all go on the HSE website and sign up for it, because that way you'll be as well informed as I am, because that's where I get the vast majority of my stuff from HSE on. And Dame Judith usually pens a little column into there as well. So there's lots of information from there. And what are they going to be doing? Well, we've already said this. More in the regulatory regime, that's easy for me to say, for high-risk buildings, but the competence is of competence of people working on all buildings, and the safety and performance is of all buildings. That's the stuff on building where HSE takes over responsibility for building regs. So the new framework for high-risk buildings is these gateway points. It's a nice, simple, multicolour expression of gateway points. 3 significant gateways. The first one is pre-planning. So that's sort of which is the one that's gone live already, which is considering things like, are you going to build this building so that fire crews and rescue crews can get to it? And how big is it going to be? And how's it going to impact on all the other buildings around it? Okay, once you've done that, if you've done that and you're okay with that, they say, yes, it's fine. Permission to plan is granted. At that stage, you're into pre-construction, and Gateway 2, we've heard this morning full plans. Doesn't help when they put the phrase design and build statement into one of their consultations. It has me and Niall really quite grumpy. Well, we can't do that. So that's full plans. Regulator reviews the plans and says yes or no, permission to construct. Away you go. Once you've done that, there's then the preoccupation, permission to occupy. The regulator comes back. And again, it won't just be a paperwork exercise for what we were told this morning. There will be some form of inspection, permission to occupy. And then within the occupation phase, there's regular checks, there's the safety case. All that's underpinned by the yellow arrow, the golden thread of information moving through. And some of the stuff that's in the consultations, there's an awful lot of stuff they want in that golden thread file. An awful lot of stuff. Okay? So, and this was my question that I was saying to Chandra as he left. Now we're aware of the fact that, I mean, he said 66% of submissions are being rejected at Gateway 1. Dame Judith said 50. 66 was new to me this morning, so that's out of date already. Dame Judith said it in her last newsletter, said 50% of things were being rejected. And the tier ones are already worried about the implications of Gateway 2. If they have to full plan, which is way beyond what we do at the moment, it's a massive time burden to get to Gateway 2. And then the regulator has to accept it and review it. And the consultation information says, if the regulator doesn't come back to you in time, that's not consent. That doesn't necessarily mean you can build. Okay? If the regulator doesn't come back in time, that means the regulator's not come back in time. You still have to get the regulator to sign it off. And that will be the same with Gateway 3, that when you get to the end, the regulator will have to sign it off and give you that. So there's a whole load of more admin, as well as actually all that extra planning that goes in, that doesn't go in at the moment with design and build contracts, contractor design portion. So there are 30-odd consultations open. We had a big, within these 30-odd consultations, it's probably worth mentioning, there's lots of emphasis on client responsibilities. And we had some of those discussions this morning as well. And one of the things I'm a bit concerned about is, does the client actually have the competence to appoint all these people and be aware of the fact that they're appointing all these people? So there's stuff on the client. There's a lot more emphasis on the client side. There's a lot of legal responsibility heading in the general direction of a client. No go live date for Gateway 2 in there, and so we've fortunately that bottom one, we were worried about it, but we think we've dealt with it this morning. Whew. Right. Building Safety Act. There is also in there a proposal for a mandatory occurrence reporting system for safety occurrences. Now, those of you who are in the world of structure probably are aware of CROSS. And if I could remember what the acronyms were, collaborative reporting of structural safety or something. And this is now going to be, there's something along this lines is going to be extended to cover not just structure but fire. Okay? So in effect, there will be a reporting system where if you have something that could put somebody's life at risk or a significant number of people, examples including unauthorised works, a fire safety defect in a building, or after the effect, a fire which has breached compartmentation, mandatory report to HSE, and they're going to investigate, disseminate the what, when, where, why. Okay, so that's coming. There's a bit of concern about that because, you know, who's going to judge the competence of these people who are doing then, and all the responses. There has been a cross one recently on intumescent coatings, and I wasn't very impressed with the response, shall we say. I certainly wasn't very impressed with the response. Okay. There is, within the Building Safety Act, there is also some stuff on construction products. It's about the last 10 pages. It's tucked away right at the very, very back of it. So if you work for a construction products manufacturer, just turn right to the back and work from the back forwards. It probably makes more sense. the Secretary of State has lots of powers to make regulations for construction products, and it's how he's going to use them. He did publish some secondary legislation in October 2021, and we are waiting to, that's been out there for nearly 12 months, and obviously the Safety Act has gone through, the Building Safety Act has gone through now, so we're waiting to see how that secondary legislation changes and whether that secondary legislation changes any. I think the key thing is that this safety critical thing is still in there. We're going to get a new regulator for construction products. That new regulator is OPSS. We had a number of us had a meeting with OPSS last week, and basically how this is going to be set up for is that the OPSS is going to work with local trading standards to help local trading standards understand the complexity of these things. They're going to have powers to rectify problems and prevent further harm and this sort of thing. But they are purely going to be looking at manufacturer, the product that leaves the factory gate, and the information that leaves in accompanying the product. The OPSS is not going to be looking at design. They're not going to be looking at installation. The design and the installation piece will sit with HSE. So this is purely make sure that as a manufacturer, that what you're making is what you're making and it's right, and that your information isn't overclaiming performance in any way, shape or form, and that's fine. Okay. We were told this morning they've already started looking at some key product areas, and said that was the meeting that we had with them last week, because one of the key areas that they're looking at already is smoke control dampers. Would help if they knew what a smoke control damper was, but one of the key areas they're looking at is smoke control dampers. Isn't that right, Darren? So, OPSS. At the moment, what we're expecting, and I'm sure if you've seen me talk, you'll have seen this slide. What we're talking about is 3 different levels of regulation for construction products going forwards. In the left box, we have a general duty of safety. And we'll talk a bit about what that means. That basically means as a manufacturer, you've got to make sure it's safe before you put it on the market. That's taking a piece of consumer legislation and putting it into construction product world, but that's okay. And we'll talk a bit about how you do that in the next slide. On the right-hand side, we've got the existing regulatory approach. So where we had harmonised European norms under our old construction products regs pre-Brexit, now called designated BSs, and you have to UKCA mark it to put it on the market. Well, you have to CE mark it until the end of the year, and then you can, or UKCA, and then after the end of the year, you have to UKCA it. That continues to apply. And from an ASFP standpoint, that's dampers. Pretty much all our other product families at the moment, where we have ongoing product certification, they would sit in the middle box. So at the moment, the product certification requirements are voluntary. ASFP members do it because we ask you to do it. We think it's the best way to verify product performance and ensure constancy of performance. And so that's what happens, but it's purely a voluntary thing. Well, what's going to happen is government's going to create this new list of safety critical products in the middle. They will have a new series of product standards. No doubt we'll be involved in helping them do that. And so we move to that point where these things that are currently voluntary will become mandatory, but measurable, time period measurable in years to get to that standpoint. We talked a bit about general product safety there. On the first slide, on the left-hand box, BSi has published these 2 new PASs, 7050, 7100. They are free to download from the BSi website. 7050 bringing safe products to the market, and 7100 is a recall procedure. So 7050 is what you need to do to make sure your products are safe, and 7100 is what you should do as a manufacturer if they aren't. Okay, so get 7050 and hope you never need 7100. We talked a bit about, in the middle block, about these new products, this new thing, safety critical products. Well, that's what we'll be doing. That's what government intends to create a list of safety critical products. We as a trade association would lobby that all our product families should be on that safety critical list. So that's how we get through, and we will be pushing that going forwards. And we're working with government, or we'll be working with government on that. And then when government have said yes, we'll be working with BSi to write the product standards. Okay. This is one that possibly has gone under a lot of people's radars. Okay. I already mentioned that the Secretary of State has powers to make regulations under with Building Safety Act. Well, he's already done it. We've had this building regulation amendment, and one of the key things here is there's some new restrictions for external metal composite materials that have come out, and this is for buildings of any height. So this is the external panels that we had on Grenfell. No substantial material allowed above 35 megajoules per kilo. I mean, still, that's an awful lot of energy that could come off a external wall component, but the panels we had at Grenfell were about 42, 43 megajoules per kilo. And that pretty much rules out a lot of the plastic-filled, plastic-filled composite panels going forwards. That's there, and that will go live on the 1st of December. And Chandru talked about this morning about the Paul Morrell report. One of the reasons why we haven't got the final construction products regs stuff is because government started about 14, 15 months ago a review of construction products testing, with a view that the report was going to be by Paul Morrell would be published 12 months ago. And that report is meant to underpin the secondary legislation on construction products testing. And Chandru said this morning, of course, we're still doing this. Well, we know we're still doing this. When are you going to publish it? We're still waiting for that report to come out. There's no sign. Now, I had to change this slide. Because this slide previously had a picture of Boris with a mastic gun, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else but stood in front of this camera with a mastic gun. I couldn't find a picture of Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak with a mastic gun, and of course it's now already out of date because we don't need Mr. Sunak's picture there. Sorry. And so the best I could do was Liz Truss with the life jacket on. So what will competence in construction look like going forwards? Because basically Building Safety Bill doesn't really put any requirement on installers other than the competence requirements in the frameworks. And of course, industry's been looking at this going forwards. Dave Judy said, don't wait for government, get on with it. So industry started getting on with it, and we've been involved in a number of the industry response groups working on this since. So immediately after Grenfell, there were the Joint Industry Response Group, Construction Industry Council, Build UK, Construction Products Association came together, put these 12 working groups together, and between Niall, Phil and myself, we sit on 3 of them. And there was a Raising the Bar, which was an interim report. Setting the Bar was the final report, published 2019-2020, making recommendations. And that sort of stuff is now snowballing into a series of competency frameworks for each of the individual things. These were the recommendations that WG2 came out with for the installers. These were the things that we said. And our comment on this was that list is all very well and good, but which is it? Is it any of them? Is it all of them? what are we looking at? Should we pick and choose between whatever? Because as it stands at the moment, certainly one of the things I've been involved with, CITB's looking at, they're still focused very much on building safety on construction sites rather than safety of the final finished product. So the regulator has established a committee of industry competence. At the moment, it's not formalised. It will be later this year. It's called the Interim Industry Competence Committee, and one of the guys who sits on it, Richard, was here this morning. So that's that, and they've defined competence as a function of SCEB, skills, knowledge, experience, and behaviours, and we're probably going to talk more about that next, aren't we, Kay? So I'll not say anything more about that. BSi is published as a standard, as a framework for these, the 8670, and they've produced substandards underneath this, 8671 for principal designer, 8672 for principal contractor, and 8673 for building safety manager. And 8673 draft still exists for some strange reason. And all three of those drafts are actually ready for approval and have been since May. And again, we're keeping an eye on that one to see where they come out. So we've been working as part of Working Group 2, and there is some work going on fire stopping specialists and a scheme that Niall and Kate are heavily involved in. That's coming up with a framework which we'll be launching at some point to get, once we've got buy-in for that. And again, I'll say nothing more because I think Kate's going to talk about that. This one, so I'm almost there. 2 more, and then I'm done. So I'm going to finish with, to be honest, with this one, which was this was out of Dame Judith Hackett. As I said, she puts a little piece in the HSE's monthly bulletin on building safety. And she's giving us a message to say, it's not about don't wait for government, it's a do the right thing. And she was making the same point that Chandra made this morning, that why is it that half the proposals that are being made at Gateway 1 are failing? These are HSE, you know what HSE is going to want, and why is it that 30% are failing when they go back in the second time? That's a worry. So the time for change is now. I appreciate I'm standing here today. You've all come along to hear about this. You want to know because you want to do the right thing, and it's very easy to preach to the converted. But that's the key message here is do the right thing. Don't wait for government. So I hope that's given you an idea of what's coming for your particular sector within passive fire. There are significant changes coming for building design and approval of building safety, construction and maintenance with the safety case and stuff that's going forward. We haven't really touched on that. For construction product regulation and competence. I only hope that we get a Secretary of State who's willing to push this agenda and we can get there. My worry is that as we say, it's within the safety versus cost discussion. The cost, there's a lot of discussion on the cost side, the cost of living at the moment. How much of this will get picked up and dealt with, and how much of this is going to be put on the back burner for the time at the moment. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll no doubt do some questions and answers later.